thinking, well, what are they going to ask? Are they going to ask about some of the old families? Are they going to ask about, you know, and I've been trying to think of stories that my mom told me. Fortunately, she told me so much.
Okay. Well, the first thing, go ahead.
So I don't know what you want to know.
That's okay. We'll go through it item by item. And the first thing, that's not a good start. Get it.
It's still
I
allergy
get a dry
season.
throat. First items are what I call the name, rank, and serial number items.
Okay.
How you want your name rendered. You want to be Harriet V. McClellan or
Just Harriet
McClellan, okay? And then we need to know when and where you were born.
I was born in Bloomington, Illinois, but our family lived here.
Uh-huh.
In 1951. 67 years ago.
Birth date?
8/30/51.
And you were born in the hospital, not at home.
Yeah,
probably.
St. Joe's Hospital.
Okay.
Now, my mom was born in the house I live in. I still have the bed, too.
On Madison.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I know you do. You told me about that. Where did your family, and you can do both sides, but just briefly, where did they come from? How did they get to Central Illinois?
On my dad's side of the family, I know that they came through northern Indiana, and how far back they were on the East Coast and when did they come to the United States, I'm not sure. But they were based in Bloomington
Okay.
for at least 4 generations. Let's see, that would have been my great grandfather was born in I think Virginia, but died in Illinois, in Leroy. And so where they were from Virginia on, I don't have that much family history. In doing some work, I do know that in the 1600s, late 1600s, somebody came over from Liverpool. And so that. Now, on my mom's side of the family, her mother, which was the Hazelmans, or originally Hasselman, they settled in Tremont, stayed a little while in Indiana, but came to the States after the Revolutionary War, but I don't know how much before the Civil War. And then my grandfather Zell, my mom's dad, his grandfather came from Minden, Germany, which was northern Germany, had been Prussia at one time, but Prussia was back and forth on the size. Mm-hmm. And then in our time, it had been in East Germany, northern East Germany. So I just know Minden.
For the family that came in the 1600s and then came across it after the Revolutionary War, I'm going to ask you to just take a wild guess because none of us are going to know. But Morton was settled by a migration from the East Coast after the Revolutionary War, primarily Anglo-Scots-Irish. That's how we got the name Tazewell for the then governor of Virginia and the town name of Morton. Would it be a guess that they might have come in that stream of settlers that would have been sometime after, probably in the early 1800s?
It is possible because it was the Britain part of my family that married into the McClellan. That great-grandmother, it was her descendant that came from Liverpool. And it was a noble family. Couldn't tell you the name of the noble family, long since dead, you know. Not royalty.
Right.
You know.
But titled.
But she was the only daughter who married a Briton, and that's where the Briton came through. and but that was, generations ago. So how did the dad side of the family get to Illinois? I'm not sure, but mom's side of the family, the ones that settled in Tremont, they came from East Coast. The Hasselmans came over and migrated. They came into New York, migrated directly to Indiana, and from Indiana came to the Tremont area. And Tremont at that time was bigger than Morton. Groveland was bigger than Morton.
Were they, from the German side, were they by any chance Mennonite?
No, they were not.
Yeah, because there was a trail that we've discovered that the kind of the Mennonites and Apostolics followed that came through Ohio and Indiana, stopping off places where they had friends and relatives, and they'd go there and somebody'd say, okay, well, we know where there's some farmland, and they would go to the next place.
I have not found, in doing some genealogy, any buddy that was Mennonite or part of the Apostolic Reformed group. The most I found was Methodist, ME, but most of them were some kind of Congregationalists and stuff of that nature.
But certainly East Coast, originally.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did they all, or maybe it was just your generation, how did it wind up in Morton?
My grandfather came from Tremont in 1908, 1909, and lived at a hotel here on Main Street. And I think it was the one that was somewhere near where Old Miller's Bakery was. There was a hotel somewhere in there. And then he married Grandma, who was from Tremont, in March 7th, 1912, and they moved into the house where I currently live March 12th, 1912. So 3 days after they got married.
Is this the grandfather that had the tavern?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. From what I understand, Grandpa Zell was quite an entrepreneur, and he owned the tavern where Homestead is right now. And my parents closed it in 50 when he died, because they didn't think it was proper to have young children and own a tavern. And the backdrop to the bar is still in the building. When I remodeled that, I insisted it stay there with the cigarette burns from the bartenders and everything else. And the front bar where the patrons stood up to, they didn't sit at a bar.
Right.
That is in my basement, buried, and I don't know how I'd ever get it out without chopping it up, because it's a good 12 to 16 feet long. It came in when they had the old basement doors, the big flip and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he had a bar. He didn't run it. He had somebody run it for him. He was the first Buick dealer here in town. And before that, he sold Pace cars. And Pace was the forerunner to Buick, because Mr. Buick worked for Mr. Pace and left Pace and started Buick, and there was no more Pace. And so I've got some of his old ledgers from that. And his garage, the parking lot between the old post office and what used to be the Ben Franklin store.
Yes.
That parking lot, until I sold it to the city, that was where his garage was.
Oh.
And I remember the building as a child. It was a big old 2-story white building. It looked like a big barn, really, but had glass windows in the front. And that was where he sold cars from. And then when he bought the property, I don't know. I would have to go back and look at records. and then where Binkley Jewelers is right
Yes.
now, that was also Grandpa's building, and I still happen to have that one, and it. I know Theo Witzig. That's where his very, very first store was in that building. The very first Witzig. Then they moved down the block.
Right.
And so he just, he never had a business in the building. He just bought the building for investment. And whoever owns where Binkley Jewelers is has to own the building where Home Instead is, because of the way in the back, you can't see it except for the alley view, they overlap and the piping runs from one building into
Okay.
another. And they share some of the same. The sump pump for Binkley's is in the basement of Home Instead.
Oh,
Crazy, but he just bought and sold that. He had some farms, and I still have one of his Tremont farm. But he just was an entrepreneur, and I guess pretty savvy in his business dealings. I wish I'd known him. He died a year before I was born.
sounds like a fascinating man.
Yeah. And he was a hunter of renown. I guess he was just not too much before he died. He won a senior citizens champion trap shooting, or maybe it was skeet. He did both, and he also helped one of the people that helped form Kennel Lake Country Club.
Oh, yes.
Poor Man's Country Club.
Yes.
And at that time, he was in charge of setting up the trap shooting and stuff like that. But he died before it got finished, and so that really never took off too well. And where they had that has now all been dismantled.
Do you remember anyone from his generation or even from your parents' generation talking about what Morton used to be like?
Oh yes, my grandmother's best friend was a Dinah Oswald, and Oswald Park, which is now called Northwoods Park.
Ah, yes.
It was called Oswald Park because they gave the land,
Right.
and that's a contention with me that when somebody gives land, then they change the name so we can all have woods. But Grandma Oswald, she was my grandma. She said no child grows up without a grandparent.
Ah,
And she told me a lot of stories. And my mom told me a lot of stories. Mom would be 100 years old now if she was alive. And she remembers downtown Jefferson Street, the in-urban tracks running up and down. They had sidewalks, but the streets were dirt. And the Oswald boys were characters. They were teenagers when my mom was maybe upper grade school, junior high, and they were pistols. And I remember viewing a very, very old film of the Oswald boys made of downtown Morton. And it was a storyline. And it started off at where Stump's Pharmacy was, which is now where Firehouse Pizza is. It was Stump's Pharmacy, and then Village Pharmacy, and then the pizza. They had put a cow on the roof during the night. And, the town woke up, and here's this poor cow on top of the roof. But there's, in this old movie, and I assume the Oswalds, wherever they are, only one boy stayed here, but his children didn't. You can see the 4 or 5 boys running down Main Street, going from like the pharmacy towards Jefferson Street, and it's dirt roads and stuff like that. And I can't remember what the storyline was, but it was an old 8mm movie that Grandma brought over, and Dad ran it through his projector. And but they were the pistols of the town.
What else? What other kinds of stories? What else did you hear about Morton from the old days?
That here on Jefferson Street, right across from Homestead, where there's a beauty shop there now, and the tavern that had been the tavern, I think, had been a livery stable, and then I can't remember what was next, and then Conover's drugstore. And of course, I remember old Mr. Conover, but I don't remember Doc Conover. But my mom talked about him, that they weren't really sure if he was a doctor or not, but medical schools weren't what they used to be or are now. And but everybody went to him. And people still in town went to old Mr. Conover, who ran the drugstore, because he knew so much about medicines, which there weren't that many. And because it's like, why go to the doctor? We'll just go to, the Conovers. They'll tell us, and they'll fix us up. My mom did talk about old Jefferson School, the one that was the white 2-story wood building, and she was attending that school at the time that they built the current building, and that was through 8th grade. And then where the junior high is now, that was the high school, and that's where my mom graduated from high school. And of course it was just the central part, just the gym and just a little bit either side of it, and part of the original is still there, but you can't see it because it's been built up around it. But the old Morton, where McClellan Park is now, funny story about that is no relation. The E and the A are switched.
Yeah, saw that.
However, I got to know the great-grandson of my mom, called him Old Man McClellan. So he had to be old for my mom to call him that. And I met his great-grandson at the Heart of Illinois Fair, where I'd been superintendent. And he said, oh, well, we used to spell our name the right way, but this Old Man McClellan, my mother remembered, was mad at his father, so he switched the E and the A around. So, but it's spelled correctly as what it was when he left the land. Morton was so small. I've somewhere in my house, I've got an 18 lady, somewhere between 1850 and 1900, a plate book that shows the outline of all of the towns in Tazewell County. And that's how I know Morton was smaller than Tremont and Groveland. And Mom always said the oldest house in town still standing is on 2nd Street near the corner of Madison and 2nd. It would be like next to my backyard.
Yeah.
And one of Morton's finest police officers lives there now. A little gray house. She said that was the oldest standing. I know the house where we live, where Grandma and Grandpa bought in 1912, they were the 3rd owners. And so, this is the old part of town, and where the chamber is part of the old part of town. The canning factory and the was way on the edge of town.
Yeah.
And
yes,
way on the edge of town. And as a kid, where Pioneer Seed Company was, that seemed like it was halfway to Tremont.
Yes.
Yeah. And I liked the town when it was smaller like that. You knew everybody in this town until Caterpillar came and the town started really growing. I mean, as a kid, there was 6,000 people or so in town. You might not be friends with them, but you knew who they were, or if somebody says to you, where does so-and-so live, you could give them the right direction. And it was friendly. And Mom talked about her good friends, a lot of them went to country schools. They didn't come into town until high school. And she talked a lot about one time the Ku Klux Klan was in town. They were having some type of big tent meeting out on North Morton Avenue, probably somewhere between 74 and where Cortland Avenue is, probably about Gold's Gym. And our church was real close. The community church was not too far from there. And they came in, interrupted church service, and basically, I don't know, I'm sure they represented quite a feeling of the town, but basically told them to get out, that they didn't want no part of them. And
the church members told the Ku Klux Klan to leave.
Get out, and Abraham Lincoln, when he was a circuit rider, came through town and worshipped at the community church. At that time, it was out further on North Main, Main, and he stayed at the Brecker household, and that's on the corner of Harding and Tennessee. You kind of have a little rise there,
Yes.
and that's where the original house was. And then after Grandma and Grandpa Brecker died, they tore that down, and the brick houses along the side is where their kids built. And Grandma Brecker gave my grandmother a curio stand, and I took a picture of it, that was in the house at the time Lincoln stayed there. And she just was good friends with Grandma and gave it to her. But Mrs. Brecker wanted to make sure that my grandmother knew that Lincoln saw that. So Morton was part of that. Their mom never could prove it in her research, and being a history teacher, she loved researching history. Could never prove, but there was quite a bit of indication that a branch of the Underground Railroad came through town and out in that district, the Crandall district, out there by Tennessee. But there was no documentation, just family lore.
Yes.
But I remember the old Ackerman family, where the big
Yes.
white house
Yes.
is, and these were all old people. I mean, really gray-haired, quite elderly people when I was young.
Yes.
But old Noah Zobrist, I remember him, and one of his children is still alive, Doris. She's 95, just turned 95.
Goodness.
Yeah. She's now Doris Brecker, and lives in one of those houses. She married in that Brecker family, and then the old Grandpa Grimm, the patriarch of all of the Grimms.
Yes.
And he, little guy, really sweet little old man, talked with a German accent. And my next door, the neighbors across the street, I could talk to the husband and understand him, but I could not talk very well with Lizzie, because she never lost her German, and she didn't really learn English. And what English she learned, it was such a brogue, or not brogue, but a accent to it that it was, she used to me, I thought it was, "Get to home, you bad tomato," but that's not what it was, but it sounded like that to me, and I'm like, whatever you said, okay, but I wish I could remember exact stories of my mom's era as a child, other than the Oswald boys, running down the street. I mean, that stuck in my mind because I looked at them going, no, they're old men now. They all fought in World War II and stuff like that. And so, like, how could they be those rascally teenage boys? But my history of Morton is a lot of what my mom told me, and the love of this town. I wish it wouldn't grow. I really do, because it's lost some of its charm.
It may have lost some of its charm, but almost everyone we have talked to has agreed that it has largely kept its character. It's a town of pretty good people.
Yes.
And the question that I have asked in each case is, what do you think accounts for that? And I've a variety of answers, but there is something about Morton there's a set of values that have endured.
It's always been a church town. Other words, people of faith, different faiths, and where kids weren't just left to do whatever. That my parents' generation and grandparents' generation, and hopefully my generation, we've tried to instill into our kids the value of education, the value of good manners, the value of taking pride in your family, your history, treating your friends properly, and so I think a lot of it, has remained. It's not as strong as it used to be, but I would pick Morton before a lot of any other towns. I mean, this is home. This is a community that you really come to love.
My sense has been that even where we have, we looked at the growth. I think when I came here it was about 9,000, or in the mid-70s. And even with the growth we've had, we seem to have attracted people, even if they don't have the same church or religious affiliations, have kind of the same sense of standards. The ideas about responsibility and about community pride and proper behavior and those kinds of things. And again, when I've asked the question, I think everybody seems to think that the old values that were established have acted as a magnet. So people who have, even if they don't share the same religious or cultural backgrounds, that's the kind of value. Those are the kinds of values that we want to be associated with.
Yeah, they see a sense of community and a sense of pride without being prideful.
Yes.
And it attracts people that's what they want for their families. That they don't want the problems of a city. And let's face it, Morton has a lot to be proud of. We do have some industry, so jobs, but we have that value, like you mentioned, and so proud of our school district.
Yes.
It's for a quote-unquote small town, we've got a lot to be very proud of the education that we provide our young people. And that's where our tax dollars should go, is into the schools, because if you have a good school district, you're going to attract people who value education and not value the things that really aren't worth anything.
Things that would be alien to Morton culture.
Yeah, Morton has problems. There's a drug problem in Morton, but not like other towns or cities. We've got to be proud that we've gone from, in my days, Pat Ashburn was the only policeman in the whole town, you know, and the jail at the Civic Building, which is where they just built that atrocious 3-story apartment building and business building. The jail was round back in the lower level, and the door was always open to the jail, you know, because we kids used to go back there to you know, see if there was anybody in there, and you know, we have our EMS system, our fire department, our police department. That town has taken pride. We've spent our money where it should be spent, and that's on its citizens. You know.
What else do you remember when you were a kid growing up? Think back to grade school and high school.
The Old Fall Festival, which was the precursor to the Pumpkin Festival. It was held on Jefferson School grounds, and Libby's canned sweet corn and pumpkin at that period of time. And you could go, and they would have these big, like, horse troughs, brand new, with boiling water in it, just full of sweet corn. And you would go, and I don't know if they charged for it or not. I don't ever remember paying for it. They just hand you an ear of sweet corn that they had dumped in a big pot of butter and just gave it to you. And the Ferris wheel was on Jefferson Street, and we didn't close Jefferson. You drove kind of around it, you know. But that was always fun. The Pumpkin Festival came to town when I was in high school, and that was it was a lot different than what it is now. And I enjoy the way it is now, but I miss the way it used to be. It was more of a community thing instead of bringing everybody from all over the country in. We did not have the sports teams other than, we had high school and junior high basketball and high school football and stuff like that, but there wasn't all the soccer. The soccer teams, and Sundays were reserved for church.
Yep.
And nobody had club meeting nights on Wednesday because that was church night. Not all churches met on Wednesday night, but that was church night. I remember going to church camp with the kids from the Methodist church, our church, and I think Washington was part of it, that it wasn't just one denomination. You all went to a church camp, you know, and it was a blast. But you might not go to the same church, but you were friends with these kids. And in some ways, the churches were a little more liberal than they are now. There was some other things. Homecoming. I even remember watching it as a child. It was so much different in that on Thursday night you had the pep rally, and that's when they announced the king and queen, and then we'd have a snake dance through town. They'd get a pickup truck, and they put the new queen and her court in the truck, and the freshman attendant would hold the cheerleaders of the freshman cheerleaders' hands, and then all the freshmen would line up behind them, and the sophomore would hold the sophomore attendant's hand, and all. So you'd have 4 lines, and we would go around town. The truck would just drive real slow, but of course the ones in the back were running, and you just snake through town, and then you go back to the field where the baseball diamond is, and the janitors and the volunteer firemen had set up a huge bonfire, absolutely massive, and they'd have the old white Morton fire truck there, and we'd have a bonfire, and we'd all run around it and sing the school song, and that was so much fun. And the game was Friday night. Oh, Friday afternoon was the parade. I got out of school early and had the parade, and the game was Friday night, and then the dance was Saturday. And it's watching the homecoming parade this year. Saw somebody that was in my age bracket, and we were going, remember the snake dance? And they're going, yeah, and the bonfire. I mean, those, sad that we can't do that anymore.
It would have been late 50s, early 60s.
I graduated in '69, but I remember, because my dad was with the school districts. At that time, we had 2 school districts, and Morton High School was Morton Township High School. He usually was the one driving the pickup truck. Yeah. And I remember watching them out my window of the house as they came down Jefferson Street from like the junior high towards Jefferson School. And then they would wind around Jefferson Street, down Main Street, and I mean, they went all over the place. And kids used to be able to run around the streets, and we'd run up and down the streets, and you'd see a car coming, you couldn't get over, and then whoever was driving the car would wave to you. And I remember the old Freidinger Brothers grocery store downtown.
I don't remember.
It would be about where the bridal shop is now.
Yes.
Okay. And I think there's still a couple of Freidinger brothers around, but the old brothers were older than my mom, and it was a very narrow store. You walk in and they had one aisle, kind of like Beecham's is in Tremont. You walk down one aisle, meat department in the back, where they had the big old butcher block, and then one aisle to come up. And Coors Myers is where the community church's fellowship hall was. That was the 2 grocery stores in town. And when Caterpillar went on vacation, this town died. We always joked about they rolled up the sidewalks. Caterpillar, the last 2 weeks in July, vacation, this town was dead. Nothing went on. And bars were never allowed open on Sundays at all. It was a church town. Of course, there was only a couple of taverns in town anyway. And
was there any stigma attached to having a tavern in a town that was pretty conservative?
No.
I didn't think so.
Women didn't go there. It was a place to socialize for the gentlemen. My daughter and I each have a table, a euchre table.
Yeah.
It's a solid oak table, and it only can seat 4 people. And inside each leg is a little box where you could put your drink. Because when you play euchre, I guess you slam your fist down on the table. I'm not really sure how to play it. And that came out of my grandfather's tavern. So it was a place for the men to gather and have fun, kind of like they do when they go down to the different restaurants and have coffee in the morning and discuss solve the world's problems. And so it wasn't, was there a town drunk or something like that? I don't recall, but again, we weren't in the tavern business at that time. Go ahead.
Who were the sort of the town characters or leaders that you might remember from your time growing
Chalmers Arnett, who was with the Savings and
up?
Loan.
He was the mayor at one time, I believe.
He could have been. Old Al Carius, grandfather to Coach Carius, who is the father to the Cariuses that are, and he'll always be Coach Carius, to us, because he was a junior high coach. Al Carius, Fritz Ruling, then some of the Rapp brothers from the pottery, and Andy Rapp was the only one that I kind of remember. And I knew his widow very, very well, and she died at 104. Most of the businessmen in town, Mr. Roker from there was Roker and Dietrich, which is where Upscale Resale is.
Yes.
And then there was the furniture store. Let's see. I remember Ward Grundy. He was an influential man in town. He had taught my mother in school as a young man, and he was principal at Jefferson School when I was there until third grade, when Eliza Ackerman became principal. I had Eliza the last year she taught, which was also the first year she was principal. Let's see, I can't remember his first name, but Doniker was his last name. He was usually on city council or school board. Ray Mason, from about after he came back from World War II. He came from Atlanta, but he was quite influential in the town. He was my godfather. But I loved going to Roker and Dietrich because the main floor still had the wood slat floors that were been worn down, and that was the hardware part of it. And then you went up a back stairway, and that's where he would have the gifts and stuff like that. And got my first Barbie doll there. And that was a big deal, brand new. I remember when downtown Morton burnt, because our family was involved in that, where the Butler law office is.
Yes.
That had been right on the corner was a very narrow, probably no wider than this office, but long little grill. It had the greasiest hamburgers that were delicious. You can get, cherry Cokes and chocolate Cokes, and kids like to go in there. And next to it was the electric store. Shoot, I know where they lived, catty corner. They lived on the corner of First and Madison, and I can't think of their name. Old German couple that didn't have children, but there was like 3 stores. Electrical something or other happened, and town was ablaze. We were in Peoria at the Mohammed Shrine at a function, and Dad got a call, and he had to just drop everything and leave. And the people who brought my sister and I home, Mom went home with Dad, we could see from 74, because 74 was brand new then, the flames just shooting way up in the sky. We had to have Peoria and Pekin, and there, all kinds of fire departments, and it was freezing cold. Witzig's opened up their store and just were handing out socks and gloves to firemen. And in the jewelry store, it was Walter Gerber's jewelry store at that time, oh shoot, Jackson Street, Roki's. They got bread and they got meat from Roki's, and on the jewelry counter they made an assembly line of making sandwiches. Wayne Roki brought the meat, and I don't know where they got the bread, and we were down there because there was real possibility of the buildings across the street, and making sandwiches. The town just you didn't have the Red Cross come in to organize it. The town did it. The business owners in that area, and the ministers in town would come along and say, "What can we do to help you?" It's like Witzig's is running out of gloves and socks, and people would bring stuff from their home for the firemen. Not just the Morton firemen, but all the ones, because a lot of those buildings on Main Street were all wood, or partially wood, and they were lucky that they kept it to just that area that burnt.
So that would have been that that block from Butler down to...
Yeah, it was like 3 or 4 stores or businesses that burnt. So it was right there on the corner of Jefferson and Main.
So it would have been down to that brick building where Miller's Bakery was.
It didn't burn all that way down.
Yeah.
It
but
didn't.
it would have been that first half of that block.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that would explain why when I moved here, that
Was
piece
a little
of
park.
land was, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was just empty.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the kids, we were sad because our little greasy hamburger joint was gone. Uh-huh. And everybody thought that's where the fire started, but it didn't. It started electrical short in one of the other buildings. Yeah.
Huh. We had not heard about that before. Nobody has talked about that.
Oh yeah. There's pictures, and I know I've got some, of the ice that was just on on everything downtown. It burned for hours and hours. But it was something else. It made your heart, especially when you're coming into town, you see, and it looked like the whole downtown because the flames were huge.
I think there had been another fire, had there not, way back when sometime, a serious fire in downtown Morton, or am I mistaken about that?
That was after, and that's when the Civic building burnt.
Okay.
Where it was then the parking lot there, right across from FJT Office Supply, that parking lot area, and that had been built, I'm not sure when. It was a neat old red brick building. The upstairs had a stage and a big dance floor, and I know I took tap dancing lessons there, and we used to have youth dances in there. We had an organization called MYCCA, Morton Youth Council on Civic Affairs, and we met there, and that's where we would have our dances and our meetings, and until it burnt. I was in high school, a junior in high school, I think, when it burnt, and that again was nighttime, and I don't think we had to call in other fire districts because there was enough space that other buildings, that was right next door to Homestead, so we were called in for that one, to make sure the property was okay. But I don't remember, the passing out of socks or anything, but it was wintertime also. But that's the only fires until the last few years when we had Morton down there on Jackson Street burned and stuff like that.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
The lumber company.
So, those are the only two downtown fires of the business district that I remember, and I don't recall my mother talking about any. Now, when we remodeled Home Instead, when it was a beauty shop, we took it down to studs.
Yes.
And or took off a lot of the old stuff, and we found that there had been fire damage in that building, and you could tell where the old fire wood stove was, and because there was just charring right there in the corner, and it was kind of the way it was shaped. And the pipe went up, and so there's charring underneath there now, but it never burnt down to the ground that I know of. And of course, the fire alarm was just on the old water tower, and that was loud. And our volunteer fire department, there wasn't the joys of the modern day electronics, and so the fire siren would go off, and if it was a test, it would just go on and off. But if it was a fire, it would go and it would go and go, and it would keep going until they had enough firemen there. And they didn't have lights in their cars. As when I was a kid, they eventually got little blue lights. But it was, you knew that the fire siren's going off, just get off the street, pull off to the side, because cars from all different directions are going to just be barreling down to the fire department. And anybody who was speeding was firemen.
You told me once a little bit about your career, and I've kind of forgotten, but you graduated from high school and you went off to college.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you go?
I went several places. Illinois Central College, Bradley, and U of I. And then I in my late 30s, early 40s, I went back to school and graduated from Methodist College of Nursing. Well, at that time, it was just Methodist School of Nursing.
I thought you told me you'd been a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
And then did you finish out your career in nursing?
Yes. Yeah, the last 20-some years, I was a registered nurse. I was the lead nurse at Methodist Hospital for the main OR. So I'm a blood and guts girl.
Well, that would have been a good time to get your surgery when you were there.
I was in surgery with my own daughter, so.
Oh, I remember you telling me that once.
Yeah. And I took my sister into surgery, but that was not going to be a good one, and I just couldn't do it. To say she had a malignant brain tumor, so. But my dad, when he lived in Bloomington, had been county coroner for McLean County.
Oh.
And so I grew up on, tell me the story about this, Dad, and that, so. But Mom was a school teacher here at Jefferson School. My sister taught school at Schramm Educational Center in Pekin. My daughter taught at Grundy School. She's now at Jefferson. And my dad, when he moved to Morton, managed Mom's property, which had been Grandpa's, but he was in charge of the school buses for both school districts for 25, 30 years, somewhere in there. So, I remember the first time Morton got a fire truck where the driver sat over the wheel, that Dad had to go and help them learn how to drive that, because he had the only school bus that had the snub nose, which we have a lot of them now, but there was only one, and he was the only one that drove that bus. And so it's a different turning corners and stuff like that. So he would take them out, and that was fun for him to drive the old fire truck, or the big hook and ladder that sat over the wheels.
That is a very rich history of Morton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had a hook and ladder before Peoria did.
there was a man named Glenn Easter, who was the consultant that had been hired by the Chamber Group when they were first talking about forming an Economic Development Council, and he was one of the people that advised on the formation. And he once told me before his assignment was up, and he left town and went on to the next one. He said, "You could run the world from Morton," which I took to be a great compliment, and I also believe it to be the case.
Yeah.
There's a huge number of talented, selfless people.
Rex Robinson lived here in town, and he was the head engineer of all of Caterpillar. I mean, he ended his career at the Proving Grounds as he got older, but he was numero uno engineer for Caterpillar. Oh shoot. I want to say Flederer, but that's not right. That Flederer was the one that ran the Morton newspaper, and we had a good little newspaper, Tazewell County News. I loved that newspaper. It came out once a week, but it had all kinds of Morton news in it, and it wasn't like it then changed to and had international stuff that, well, it came out once a week, so it's old news, you know. They lived on Madison and 5th, big brown house. I'll think of the last name. He graduated with my mom from high school. He started CEFCU out of his lunchbox at Caterpillar. He worked at Caterpillar, and he neat guy. Lynn Ray, his daughter, still lives here in town. Her name's Lynn Walters, but that's not her maiden name. But anyway, he started CEFCU by somebody didn't have money for lunch or wanted to buy a drink, and he would lend them money, and they'd pay it back, or But all of that, and then it built and it built and it built, and that was the beginning of CEFCU. From a Morton class of 1936 gentleman from Morton. And of course we had the Rapp brothers, the Morton Pottery, and I remember Mom saying that when King George the Sixth, the King's Speech fame, and his wife visited the United States pre-World War II, trying to get the United States to back England, that they were given a gift, and it was a gold horse kind of standing up, like it was on its hind legs, made at the Morton Pottery. Mom had one, and she goes, "I've got the same thing that they gave the King and Queen of England." And I'm like, something from Morton Pottery.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. And somewhere in my house I have that horse, but I don't know where it is. But the Morton Pottery was very well known. Not expensive items, but very well made. The old Cliffwood restaurant, which is where the Chinese place is now, that was a good place to go. And then Club 150, which is where Schooners is now.
Yes.
That was a good place to eat. Going to Peoria was an all-day trip. You only had 150 to go on as a kid. And you plan it for the day. And like I said, Pioneer Seed Company, that was like going to halfway to Tremont. There's I remember when the high school was new, there was a picture taken when they had the open house, grand opening. I was not that old, maybe 4 years old or so, and happened to be Mom, Dad, and my sister and I coming out the front door, and that was the front of the front page of the Morton Times. So Mom kept that, and they built the addition and the new cafeteria and the girls' gym over the summer of '65, because I graduated 8th grade '65, started fall '65 at high school, and was the first class to use that girls' gym, which buckled. And so for the most of the first year, you'd walk into the girls' gym and you had to walk around this big, the whole floor was just buckled, I mean way high. And I remember going to the high school, the old cafeteria, which is where the counseling offices are now, and you lined up outside and came in, and then you'd work your way around, and they would give polio vaccine on sugar cubes.
Yes.
Because the polio vaccine had come out, and that was a big deal, and that was done up at the high school. The community, when we had things to do, the schools really played a big part in it by opening their doors, and the bad kids in school were the high schoolers that maybe went across the street and smoked. They were the bad kids, and people were more tolerant. I remember riding in a '65 Mustang, sitting on the back, up on the hood, where the fold down.
Yes.
And we'd gone out for lunch. We could still go out for lunch at that time. And we were all laughing. I wasn't the only one sitting up there. There was probably 7 or 8 of us in this Ford Mustang. And police drove by, and they just looked at us and said, "Sit down," and then they went on. Nowadays you would be pulled over and this and that, but we sat down. Nowadays they'd be like, "Yeah, right," So, there used to be 3 pancake and sausage dinners, not breakfasts. The Kennel Lake, the Masonic Lodge, and the community church. They went in together and bought griddles. And those have been some of the griddles that the Pumpkin Festival has borrowed over the years. And they each bought a griddle. And they would take turns. Whoever had the pancake and sausage in January, the next year would have it in March. And they would rotate around who got to be first, who was in the middle, and who was last. And they just, shared the griddles, and so everybody just kind of worked together. And that was a big deal. And people would come out for those, because we didn't have the other than Club 150 and I just mentioned the name, where the Cliffwood. You didn't have places to eat here in town. In high school, we had Vince's Pizza, and that was about it for the kids, because our favorite little greasy spot burned until they made McBurger, which is the defunct tavern out by Field Shopping Center.
Okay.
Vince's Pizza was about the only place in town to get pizza at that time that I recall. He was straight from Italy. And so when churches, didn't matter if you went to church or not, had a dinner open to the public, everybody came.
Oh.
Chili suppers. It was just a big community. So,
what do you think has been the most significant change in Morton in your lifetime?
In my lifetime, the size. We can't burn our leaves, so we don't have that wonderful smell anymore in town. knowing everybody. When I was watching the homecoming parade this year, I used to know at least who they were or recognized everybody that would be watching. And there was only a handful of people I recognized or even knew who they were. And that was really kind of I've been here all my life. Yeah, I moved away for 10 years or so, but I was just in Peoria and Pekin.
Oh.
And it's like, I miss at least being able to just walking down the street and say, hi, how are you? And you knew who you were saying hi to. You might not know them well, but you knew who they were. And the Pumpkin Festival. And I know I'm here in the chamber office, and it's a wonderful pumpkin festival. Wouldn't miss it. We'll never miss a pumpkin fest. But I miss that it's gotten too big. It's gotten way too big. The joy has gone out of it. This year I got pumpkin ice cream for the first time in 3 years because I couldn't stand in the lines.
Uh-huh.
I had done some damage to my body and I couldn't stand in lines. And thank goodness for the drive-through because I couldn't do the lines. It's gotten too big. What they need to do is sell the ice cream in the food tent besides the delight tent.
Well, you're talking to the right people.
Then you wouldn't have such a big line, at least while food is being served at the delight tent.
Thinking about the biggest change, what do you envision for Morton in the future? I mean, looking down 10 years.
I believe that this community will still put a big value on education. I hope that never changes. I'm seeing a trend in Morton. Yeah, we had some families that economically were maybe struggling a bit versus those that weren't struggling whatsoever. But we're seeing more and more now in people in economic troubles in this town. In doing like angel trees for Christmas and going either through We Care or the school district. I think it was 2-3 years ago, just at the junior high, and just for our church, we got the names of 40 families from just the junior high that they knew would not have a Christmas.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And that didn't count the ones we got from We Care. And this year we couldn't even take on from the school districts. We just took from We Care. And I think when we loaded up the presents, we had 11 carfuls of presents to take to We Care. And that's sad, but that's part of the economic times. And I think this community will, and I hope this community still has that wonderful, caring heart to help our neighbors. And I can see that this town will still have pride in its community, in the public services that they provide, like our fire department, our police department, our EMS, or I should say paramedics. What town this size has 24/7 2 paramedics, ambulances? That to me is important. Bringing industry into town, that's not important to me. The people that live here, that's what's important, and that's what I hope will continue, that that sense of we belong, and I really think it will, because the people that do move in here, they move in here because Morton just seems like the right place, the right fit, and they're looking for a hometown. They're not looking for a place to live.
Okay, it's a good point maybe to wind up. We've been talking for about an hour, I think.
Oh, really?
What have I not asked you about that we should know about Morton, or from your experience? What kinds of things that you want us to know that we haven't probed?
You know, there's so many things I remember when there was no 74, to where it ended at Deer Creek, to you know, I remember when in high school, and he continued at post high school, a young man from my sister's class, who then came back to Morton and taught Spanish, used to work with the migrant workers at Libby's to teach them English. You know, and that was community service. That was because that's the type of town we are. Let's help, even though they were here temporarily. That was Steve Russell.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
Fabulous teacher. He's retired now. I just love that we're in a neighborhood, and of course, I would never move where I live from. When my mom died, it was like, I'll rent out my house. I'm moving to the homestead, you know. And that house will go to my child and hopefully go to her grandchildren. But we have so many wonderful people in this town that care, and that's what I remember the most, is lifelong friends that I'll always have. And you can't make them if you live in a big city.
And with that, I think we will say thank you very much, Harriet McCall.
You're welcome.
I do actually have a couple questions, if
Okay,
I could clarify beyond that. I wanted to make sure I captured your grandfather's first and last name.
Harry Fillmore Zell.
Okay. And what are the properties that he owned?
Where the parking lot is now, between the old post office, the village building, and what had been the Ben Franklin. That's
Okay.
where he had his auto garage.
Okay.
I've sold that property to the village. And then where Homestead is at, what is that, 104 Jefferson?
I think it's 101.
101.
Oh.
Binkley,
Yeah.
Binkley's is on Main,
Yeah.
and that one of them is like 100 and one's like 104.
Okay.
Yeah, and I always get the numbers mixed up. And we still have those buildings.
Okay.
And then the house that they built, or that they moved into and we've added on to, is on the corner of Madison and 2nd.
Okay.
And that was my grandfather's grandparents' house.
Cool. Okay.
And I'd have to look at the old deed to find out who they bought it from and who they had bought it from, and you know.
In the Homestead building, I've been trying to put together some of its history. So before Homestead, it was a salon.
A beauty salon.
Okay. And before that, it was a
Jenny
tavern?
Lee's dress shop,
Okay.
bridal store.
Okay.
And before that, it was a Silco.
Okay.
That's where you went down to pay your Silco bill.
Oh.
Your Silco.
Okay.
and then before Silco, it was the tavern, and it had been a tavern when my grandfather bought it.
What was the name of the tavern? Do you remember?
I'd have to go look on
All right.
stuff. Again, since my parents disbanded the tavern, I don't.
And it was
remember.
a bank. It was initially a
That-
bank, right? Is that the same
Not my
place?
building.
Oh.
My building's the one that's on Jefferson.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. The bank faces Main Street,
I see.
and I remember that bank.
Okay.
I was a kid when they built the one where PNC is now, and
Okay.
and that was, you walk in, it was narrow, and now we have built you can walk from my building into the old bank building,
Okay. Yep. Oh, got it.
you know,
Okay.
which is basically where the safe was, because the walls are super thick.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
I was trying to put together the history of the bank building too. So okay, I didn't realize there
Mhm.
were two different properties then.
Mhm.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
But if you go into the basement, you can look right into their basement. You know, there's a hole about so big.
Oh.
You know, then now the jewelry store next door. The basement of that is really neat. It is boulders,
Really?
not brick. It's boulders. Some of them are so big. Some of them are so big.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Locally sourced, do you think?
Probably. Morton is built over a lake,
Okay. Yeah.
you know, and that's why the pottery was so good here, because there was a lot of clay,
Yeah.
and a certain kind of clay.
Yeah, and that's what gives us the high water table too.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Okay. Well, it's a pleasure.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks,
Go
Harriet.
ahead.
I think that as this develops, you may hear back. I don't know what Mary Lynn's got a mountain of stuff to do, but
Okay.
sooner or later,
Um,
all of these questions are going to get addressed about who's got what photos and who
Yeah,
knows where what is, and has artifacts at home that you might allow to be photographed or be interviewed about or whatever.
Yeah. Let me see. How do I get my pictures that I took?
I do not know.
Options. I know I've looked at them before.